As the Allies swept closer to the Rhine, they would meet their toughest armored adversary yet. The Germans' ferocious 57-ton Tiger tank would have been formidable even on a battlefield 50 years later. Its 88mm gun, along with its massive armor, meant that it could not be defeated by Allied tanks. Only overwhelmed. Luckily for the Allies, only 1,800 of the deadly Tigers were produced by the failing German production machine. The Allied drive sped forward on the treads of its armor. In mid-August, the Third Army captured Chartres and Orléans. Patton established a bridgehead across the Seine River, just 30 miles northwest of Paris. Inside the capital, elements of the French resistance rose up against the German occupiers. As fighting raged inside the city, the great Allied armies to the west surged forward behind their tanks towards the French capital and all that lay beyond. By August 22, 1944, with bridgeheads across the Seine, both north and south of Paris, Patton's army reached the outskirts of the Great Prize. In the streets of the capital, fighting between forces of the resistance and the German troops intensified. Units of General Jacques Leclerc's French 2nd Armored Division raced toward the city, fired by reports that Hitler had ordered its total destruction. At the same time, the U.S. 4th Armored approached Paris from the south. The honor of liberating the French capital fell to Leclerc. On August 25th, his tanks fought their way into the city. That afternoon, Leclerc received the German surrender. On the following day, Charles de Gaulle, symbol of French resistance, triumphantly entered Paris. The citizens were jubilant, but after several days of wild celebration, tanks were being gassed, and the cry was, "On to the Rhine, on to Berlin." Their armored columns now led the way in a headlong drive to clear northeast France and Belgium. But controversial Allied decisions gave the retreating Germans time to harden a vicious defense line at the Rhine. The M10 Wolverine tank destroyer was a valuable asset in the armor-led Allied offensive. The open-topped M10, mounted on a Sherman chassis with its high-velocity 76mm gun, made it a fine support for the lighter gun Sherman. As August passed into September, the entire Allied line continued its eastward advance. On the southern front, the ports of Toulon and Marseille fell to General Delatre's French troops on August 28th. In the north, the British took Brussels on September 3rd and Antwerp 2 days later. Units of the U.S. First Army were already firmly entrenched across the Belgian frontier. With the Brittany ports left far behind in the rapid drive to the Seine, the gas-thirsty Allied tanks and hungry GIs now depended on the American truck convoy known as the Red Ball Express. The trucks rolled 24 hours a day, delivering the food, ammunition, and fuel to keep the armored spearhead moving forward. As the Allied tanks sped toward the German border, America's M5 also played a vital role in the advance. Armored combat had quickly revealed the shortcomings of its predecessor, the M3 light tank, with its flyweight 37mm gun and negligible armor. But as the toughest and heaviest of the pre-war light tanks, the M3 took on a stronger engine and, upgraded as the M5, fought well through the whole war. On September 17, 1944, in Operation Market Garden, troops of the Anglo-American 1st Airborne Army were dropped into Holland behind the German lines. General Montgomery had devised a plan that was bold beyond belief. its objective to seize vital Dutch river crossings and open the way for a British thrust into the heart of the Ruhr. Although American airborne divisions accomplished most of their objectives, the British 1st Airborne, relying on a 60-mile overland strike meant to relieve them, could not, without armor, hold off a panzer-led counterattack for sufficient time. During early September, as Canadian troops were liberating the French Channel ports, men of Courtney Hodges' 5th Corps made the first penetration of the Siegfried Line. But a violent German reaction to this incursion closed the breach a week later. Behind the drive to the Rhine was a lot of tough mopping up. On September 10th, Canadian units finally fought their way into Le Havre, and the city fell. Elements of Patton's 3rd Army and Patch's 7th met west of Dijon, providing a continuous 500-mile front from Switzerland to the North Sea. This link-up trapped thousands of men of the German 19th Army in the southwest of France. Units of the U.S. 1st Army crossed the German border north of Aachen. Not since the days of Napoleon had Germany been invaded from the west. Allied spirits were high. Little more than 3 months after the perilous landings at Normandy, the invaders found themselves ever closer to the Rhine. On September 12th, units of the American 1st Army began the siege of Aachen. The armor weapon the Germans had masterminded was set loose against them. The following day, a few miles to the southeast, Rhine became the first German town to be captured by American troops. At the northern end of the line, the Canadian 1st Army continued its attacks against the Channel ports. Boulogne fell on September 22nd, followed by the surrender of Calais a week later. Canadian 2nd Division attacks against South Beveland Island began in early October. The Germans resisted fiercely, and amphibious landings by British units were necessary before the island was taken on October 30th. The campaign against Walcheren Island also proved costly before the last pockets of resistance were eliminated. More than 10,000 prisoners were taken. By the time the first ships entered Antwerp in late November, the Allied supply situation had turned critical. For the first time, a lack of fuel and ammunition became as much an enemy to the Allied armor as the German 88s. The drive to cross the Rhine would feel its effect.